Welcome to the Faith is Not Blind podcast. My name is Sarah Devonier, and I have the honor of being here with Fiona Givens today. And this is an interview I've been looking forward to for a long time, partly because I've admired Fiona's work since I started reading it, and also because she has spoken a lot and thought a lot about the issue of doubt, which is it's a hard issue. A lot of people aren't sure how to deal with it, and it's a privilege to talk to you about that today.
You're lovely. Thank you.
Would you start talking about, before we get into the doubt and sort of the pros and cons of a life that allows doubt, will you talk about your childhood and your first experiences with simple childlike faith and how you would describe that?
Well, I was raised Catholic, and I think that's an absolutely brilliant way to describe my life. It was simple childhood faith. Catholicism is very beautiful. It's aesthetically pleasing. I loved going to Mass. I loved the colour of the vestments the priest donned. I loved the smell of incense in the chapel. I absolutely loved Catholicism. I'm not sure if I could say that I was ever converted. I was educated, as were my brothers, in Catholic schools. So from the very beginning until my graduation. And for me, it was all girls' schools. So it was Catholic schools, and most of our teachers were women as well. So it was a very different sort of education experience. And my faith just went along. I loved it. I went through sort of, my brothers always say that I'm out with the fairies. That's generally how they describe me. So, there was a flirtation with becoming a nun, because I thought that would be romantic. And then I thought about it a little bit more, and I thought, no, I don't think that would be romantic at all. I was very comfortable in a religious, spiritual realm.
And it sounds like it was sort of a tactile, aesthetic experience that you were completely involved in it.
Yeah, which made coming to a Mormon church absolutely wow. And I could understand when we were in Wiesbaden, the church was small, and so it would be a room on the top floor. But then when I, entered the chapels and there is no beauty anywhere, I have to say, the temple saved me. Because I went there and it's like, oh my gosh, Mormons do symbolism.
Yes.
The
ritual of the temple would have felt like coming home for you.
Yes, they definitely did.
So with this background, with this Catholic ambiance that you loved, how did you find the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and what appealed to you? Because like you said, it is so different,
right?
Just in the way that we express beauty.
Yeah. Well, I was on my gap year in Germany, in a little village called Eltvilla. And I was going to be reading German at the University of Wales, and I knew that it was going to be a very difficult course, so I wanted to ensure that my German at least was up to snuff. And I just happened to be teaching two boys English, well, ostensibly. I was supposed to be teaching them, they weren't at all interested in teaching English. One was learning English, one was 11, the other one was 14, and they had other things to do. But it was a massive house, and the woman who ran the household was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So we talked about God. I mean, really, I was, and that was sort of my turf anyway. I was very comfortable in it. I loved the sort of things she said. And then she invited me to church one day, and I said, sure. I was very comfortable in Catholicism. I was not looking to move. And it was like, yes, I should, being the member of the only true and living church, as we're the oldest, so that gives us all the rights to say that. I thought, well, yes, let's disperse the largesse and I'll move into these other traditions and see how I can expand my mind further. Anyway, we arrived. It was a small room on the second floor of a building. But as I stepped over the threshold, I felt something.
That soon?
Yeah, it was immediate. I just stepped over the threshold, and I remember thinking, what was that? I thought, well, that was a bit weird, odd. I'd never felt it before. And anyway, things went on swimmingly. I liked the people who were there, and you know, who can resist men in uniform? I mean, I was 19, so were they.
The missionaries.
Yeah, the missionaries. You can come and talk to me about anything you like. I wasn't serious. I really was not thinking of converting.
So you felt something.
I felt
but you
something.
just thought
I felt that something, but I didn't know what it was. It was like it was tangible, and I felt it. It was real, and it seemed to be coming outside. It was outside. There was something about the place that was electrified. Because I remember looking down at the threshold and thinking, oh, it looks like an ordinary threshold.
So what moved that your willingness to talk to the missionaries about something other than the fact that they were in uniform?
Well, no, it was a terrible flirt. So I remember when the missionaries came over, my friend said, Fiona, these are missionaries. I said, yes, I know, they've explained that. No, you don't understand. These
You
are
shouldn't be
missionaries who
flirting
don't
with
date.
them. Yeah.
They don't date. And I remember thinking, what a waste. So, you know, to be honest, anyway, I think it was terribly flirtatious on my part. I have to say, I think I must have been a mission presence worst nightmare. But, you know, the elders were desperate. This was Germany. You know, in the 70s, there were very few people who were going to open the door and allow them in. But so the discussion was, you know, I don't think we ever had discussions actually, but it went blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the discussion, both missionaries bore testimony of their love for me. And I thought that was extraordinary. It really caught me up short because this wasn't flirtation. There was nothing. This was a very different experience of love that I'd had from that gender. But it seemed to be real and compassionate and coming from a place with which I was completely unfamiliar.
So this sort of agape, sort of charity.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. Exactly,
Right.
it's exactly how I described it.
And so that feeling of this fraternal, godlike love, how did that lead you towards a conversion that you weren't expecting?
Well, no. Well, one, that was awesome. So what that did was, you know, stop the playing that I was doing, you know, this ridiculous, you know, let's put Fiona in the centre sort of thing, which I generally did. I was head girl of my school too, so I was really pretty awful. It's like Percy Weasley, except just a woman, female head girl.
We still like Percy though.
Yeah, he came up.
He came around.
You're right. So I think we can say the same about me. He came around eventually, but what a nightmare. So we started having conversations. I wouldn't call them discussions, but that the Holy Spirit was incredibly strong. And as a Catholic schoolgirl, the Catholic Church was going ecumenical, so it was always an excuse to get out of school. But we'd go to the beach generally, and there were a group of us, and there was usually a priest involved, and then maybe a couple of nuns in attendance, but maybe they put some people from another. I don't remember, but this was it was like a testimony meeting. We'd, you know, eat, you know, things and chat, whatever, and then we'd gather in a circle, and then essentially everyone would bear their testimonies, but I never could. I never could because I never felt prompted to. I didn't know what to say. And I did try at one of these meetings, but I felt like such a fake. I just thought, oh, this is so wrong. It felt so wrong. It's like I just stopped and sat down. It's like everybody can see that you do not believe a thing you're saying, Fiona. You know, so I sat down. But the experiences that I was having during the conversion, I would call them Pentecostal. A lot of light and a lot of fire.
Well, and it seems like at those initial experiences when you didn't feel it, you didn't feel that fire, it was important to you to be sincere and to be genuine. You weren't going to say something you didn't feel. But once you started to feel something, did that change the way that you were able to articulate it and to be able to sort of bear testimony of these new ideas?
That's such a good question. I'm actually not sure when I bore testimony. I have a feeling it was a very long time. I don't think I was associating the two at all. It was just my experience. I do remember a particular moment when the missionaries had left me a tape of President Kimball because he was the prophet at the time, and it must have been a conference. It was a conference, I'm sure. But anyway, I started listening to. I listen. I hear better in the dark. or when my eyes are closed. So I turn the light out, I turn the tape on, and it took me a while to adjust myself to his voice. So I had to go through that. It sounds like he's had throat surgery. I wonder if he's had throat cancer. This is interesting. So once I adapted myself to his voice and then settled in, I don't know what he said. I don't remember. I just remember a very strong declaration. You are listening to a prophet's voice.
Wow.
And that was extraordinary because prophets weren't even on my radar, so it's like,
Except for
wow.
Old Testament prophets, maybe.
Right, and
but
we're not biblically literal Catholics in general. And so, apart from the stories in the Old Testament, I really had very little connection. It was just something, this is a prophet. But I did know my Bible well enough to know there were prophets in it.
When you talk about this, I like how you said the word Pentecostal experience, because I think a lot of us assume that if you have a Pentecostal-like experience, the rush of the Spirit, that would just take you and carry you through for the rest of your life. And so I'm glad that you used that word, because a lot of us have experiences like that, where we have felt the Spirit. We know it's the Spirit. We can testify of it. We maybe know we've heard a prophet's voice. And here's where the discussion of doubt would come in.
Right.
Because maybe it's not supposed to be Pentecost every day.
Oh, I don't think
What
it
do we
is.
do the day after Pentecost?
I think that's such because my conversion period was actually really painful. So it was very rapid, and I should not have listened to the missionaries. They really encouraged me to call my family, and I thought, no, I'm 3 weeks into this thing. I mean, this will blow them out of the water. Although I felt it was really beautiful, and they would share in the beauty of the experience with me. There was also that, but they may not. Anyway, so I did. I called my mum. She was getting ready for a dinner party. The first thing out of her mouth was, what, Brigham Young and all those wives? Interestingly, they're not part of the lessons. So I didn't know. I didn't know about Brigham Young.
So that was the
and
first
polygamy.
that you had heard.
Yeah, and it was like...
What an introduction.
But it was so interesting. It's like, Mum, you've got something wrong. No, my mum had it all right. And then for my father, it's unfortunate. It's his late 70s, and a number of us in this particular socioeconomic class were doing very strange things, like joining the Moonies, the Mormons, or in my case, the Bader-Meinhof terrorist gang, which was still active in Frankfurt at the time. And so, my mum went cult, my dad went terrorist. So I thought, oh, I need to go home. I need to go home. We need to sort this out, because I'm not the person they're seeing, this monster they're seeing in their head. So my baptism was for that Saturday, and the elders were really concerned. I did not get baptized on my return, so they were right to be concerned. But I went home, and it was winter, and this is my dramatic self, I'm sure. But every time I saw a cross, it was like Calvary, Calvary, Calvary. It was just so painful. I was obviously, my parents were shattered, and the scripture that prompted me to go was to honor your parents, and I felt that I had to do that. But being with them, I saw that this breach, if I were to become a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this breach would not be healed, ever, at least not in my lifetime, and it has not. So I had to weigh. So when I went back, the missionaries, were suspecting that I wasn't going to be baptized. My parents had put me in touch with a very close friend who was a priest, and I'd got this thing, all the things that sort of a timeline, a theological timeline of where the Catholic Church, other churches went wrong, and he went through this and why the Mormon Church was true, and he said, Fiona, the dates are off. The dates aren't right. And it's like, okay, if the dates are off, what else is wrong? And so that got me thinking, okay, maybe this isn't what you thought it was, Fiona. So I got back, told them I wasn't being baptized, and then just languished for about 6 months. I couldn't go back to the Catholic Church. Couldn't go back.
Right.
because I'd felt something, and I didn't have the courage to go forward because I didn't want to lose my family, and I knew that's what was going to happen. So finally, there's Shakespeare. It's always Shakespeare who rescues you at the end of the day.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, above all, to thine own self be true. We had, that was, Hamlet was our A-level text the year I graduated. And that was it, really. And I thought, well, I don't have the courage to go on, and I can't go back. So we arranged for the baptism to be around Easter, which was rather lovely. But to be honest, my baptism was an awful experience. I was crying, goodness me. I couldn't leave the girls' bathroom. I was just sobbing.
To be or not to be. And you knew that once you took that step forward, you couldn't go back. It was either to be or not to be.
Yeah.
There's Hamlet again. And
I know. So finally, I got myself together enough, and those poor people, I don't know how long they'd waited. Anyway, I was baptized, and when I came out of the waters of baptism, I did feel calm. And I felt a calmness, and it was a sort of an assurance that what I had done was not malevolent, was not evil, but was actually good. And so that was lovely, the calm. I really needed the calm. I really don't remember much about the confirmation. It was just coming out of the waters. I just felt this calm. But I was a very wobbly convert. So I couldn't go back to England to go to university. My testimony just wasn't strong enough. So whenever I go home to England, I'd come back in a complete mess. And I had this lovely home teacher who would pick me up at the airport. I don't know how he knew I was coming. Pick me up at the airport, we'd stop at a pizza place, get a calzone, and then he'd drop me off at my flat. And by the time I got to my flat, I was working for the church office buildings in Frankfurt. By this time, I was together. But this was it, you know, seismic shifts from one to the other. And so my bosses said, Fiona, why don't you apply to BYU? I mean, you obviously want to go to university, and I thought this would be fine. And so I did, but it's a long way from home. And so the division that it created in the family just grew expansive just because of the expanse of geography that existed between. So my brothers grew up and I grew up, and we meet together, but it's particularly uncomfortable from the brother just younger than myself. My brother David is fine. He said, of course she was going to do something weird and join a cult. John, how did you not see that?
What you're making me think of with, the combination of the holy and sort of the curse of, and it seems like that's kind of how it is. I want to make sure I get this right, so I'm going to read it. There's this quote from Flannery O'Connor, and I think she's talking about what you went through. I think there is no suffering greater than what is caused by the doubts of those who want to believe. I know what torment this is, but I can only see it, in myself anyway, as the process by which faith is deepened. A faith that just accepts as a child's faith and all right for children. But eventually you have to grow religiously as every other way, though some never do. What people don't realize is how much religion costs. They think faith is a big electric blanket, when of course it is the cross.
Right.
And I'm thinking about your nostalgia as you were moving forward to your baptism, you'd see the cross and be nostalgic for it. What does the cross symbolize for you now in terms of what the price that you've had to pay for your faith?
It's so interesting. The cross has been such a significant part of my life. I remember when I was told, and I wore it, and I wear it now, Actually, I designed my own. I call it the Mormon Cross. It's a cross and then it's got an Easter lily on it. But I remember being challenged all the time for the cross. I couldn't understand what is it with Mormons and their objection to the cross. I can understand the objections to the crucifix, walking around wearing a crucifix, but the cross is the disembodied. There is no body on the cross.
It's a
sign
symbol.
It's of resurrection.
Yeah.
So that was difficult for me for a while. So the cross has been central all the way through. It's been central to my life. I remember. I remember Good Fridays very well. I remember going to church with my mum. I remember feeling the pain. It's like Good Friday you felt the weight of the suffering on the cross. For me, in Gethsemane and Mormonism shifts, and I think not incorrectly, suffering to Gethsemane, because I think that really was when I just analysing. I'm looking at my children here, and a lot of questions not only my children have, but many LDS have, is why does God not answer our questions? If we are doing all of these things, why is my mother not healed? Why, why? And I've realized through time that God can't always answer those questions in the way we are. So for me, Gethsemane is that place where Christ asks the question, and it's not rhetorical.
Right.
Can you please take this from me? Because I can't do this.
Well, yeah.
I mean, the horror and the terror of the situation. In the pre-existence, it was sort of hypothetical. But now he's there, but God cannot ask the question the way in which Christ is answering it.
And when we talk about that Good Friday moment, when we're on our cross and we have our doubts, if you're saying that God can't take it from us, and maybe he wouldn't and maybe he shouldn't, how do you feel like those Good Friday moments are good for us then? How have they been good for you?
Well, they're essential for me. It's just that we need to expand our minds in order to be able to tune our ability to hear God answering questions. And I think that's really beautiful, because God is multilingual. And especially when we're in those areas of doubt, my doubt, a huge doubt, as for many women, was polygamy. And I struggled with it for many, many years. I think people think that doubt needs to be resolved immediately because it's incredibly painful. And it was very painful. And it wasn't until actually researching for the Christ who heals that pushed me right back into the early Christian texts. When I was reading early church fathers like Irenaeus, Ignatius, Gregory of Nyssa, and as I read their writing, some of it was almost verbatim Joseph. It was extraordinary. I can say with all of my conviction that Joseph Smith was channeling revelatory power.
And that's a really fine distinction you're able to make. If there are people who have doubts and they can't navigate that, talk us through how you navigate that. Because I think for some people, like we said, to be or not to be, either Joseph was a prophet or he wasn't, and I don't know how to reconcile this. So talk about how you're using the space, what we're talking about, the space between Good Friday and Resurrection Sunday. There's some space, there are some days. So how do you use that time to get to a place where you feel okay about something that complex?
That's a brilliant question, and I think for everyone, it's going to be slightly. My paradigm is different, and I think this actually helps me. Most of my friends grew up in the Mormon tradition, where history was actually part of theology.
Right.
And so, whatever you said with the history, whatever said Joseph Smith, they had to mesh. So when you find they don't mesh anymore, then everything, it's a much more painful place than I was.
Interesting.
Because of my background, because I was educated in an all-girls environment with women, our view of men was, some of them can dance, and occasionally some of them can add something that's, intelligent to the conversation. That was it. So as far as men in my life, but with the Mormon community, they're growing up with priesthood. And although we had priests, it was the nuns, really, in the convent. They were our leaders. They were our role models. The priests came in once a week to do Mass. That was about it. But otherwise had no role. But in Mormonism, priesthood has a really, really, really strong role.
Yes.
And I think this is difficult when you have sort of a very declarative statement. Joseph Smith was not only a prophet, he's completely unflawed. And so and Joseph himself was so, I'm not, I have weaknesses. I wish people would stop scribbling down everything I'm saying as though what I'm saying is coming from God. I'm not vouchsafed the same liberty that every other American has of just opening my mouth and speaking, because people will scribble it down and say this is the word of the Lord. And so Joseph himself and our text do, but the way people like me were raised in the church, you could not divorce the one from the other, and they have to be divorced.
And so you would say if someone's going through doubt especially with church history, to be able to say you need to separate those and study them. I think it's so interesting that your answer sort of came through studying ancient texts.
Right.
And what would you recommend to people who maybe have not had that experience of trying to separate different doctrines, separate the history from the prophet? How would you recommend that they do that?
Well, first of all, safe people who are not going to freak out when you say, I don't believe this anymore, or I just can't, it's because once you start articulating that, you're articulating it into a company, so we're all wobbling. I mean, the ground beneath us is shaking. So, and I'd say, read the Joseph Smith papers. They fill a bookshelf. I mean, they're brilliant, but this is a very emotional thing for you.
Yeah.
So you need to find a safe place and safe people with whom you can articulate everything, and not have anybody come back to you and say, "Ooh, ah."
Well, and there are some people who are going through doubt who don't recognize, like the quote from Flannery O'Connor says, what a torment it is.
It is.
So safe people are people with whom you can say, this is a torment. This
Right.
is really difficult.
Right.
Once you find those safe people, how you mentioned the word paradigm, and you said that you have a paradigm that can work with this kind of nuance. How do you think people could shift their paradigm so that they can find those safe people, realize there might be some torment, they might be wobbly, then how could they move forward with a new paradigm?
Well, I think you're creating the new paradigm yourself by the question. We are not used to, as a people, we're not used to cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
It's like everything is great. If you keep the commandments and do all of these things, everything is going to be rosy.
Certainty, everything is absolute. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so when that comes crashing and burning, you really don't have anything to hold on to. So I think if we can, like Flannery O'Connor, not only is cognitive dissonance uncomfortable, it can be excruciatingly painful. But it's rather like Gethsemane. It's a place we have to stay for a while until that angel comes. And that angel will come. It may come in, a book. Someone says, you said we might find this interesting, or all sorts of different ways, but not to shut our hearts and minds down because of our fear, and fear will do that, to not be able to accept the answers that are coming through our friends, because they will come through our friends. I really do agree with President Kimball when he said the people who are most likely to influence are those who are being sent to us are those in our immediate vicinity, in our families, in our immediate. They don't have to come from far away. This isn't a case of telescopic philanthropy, but I really do believe that if we can help people to realize this is okay, and if you can possibly do this with a friend, do it. And for me, that's why our baptismal covenants resonate so powerfully with me, because as far as I know, we are the only Christian tradition in which covenants are articulated in such a way as to help us to be co-healers with Christ. So we have this lovely expression, Saviours on Mount Zion, and that's generally associated with temples, which is perfectly fine. But there is this other way in which we have been invited to be saviours, I would say collaborators, co-healers with Christ, and that is in the baptismal covenants. I think they were articulated earlier in the church, and I think it would be fabulous if they were articulated again. There's power when you speak words into the air. So you have somebody standing at the waters of baptism, and I covenant with you that I will carry your burdens to the community. Whoever's in the community standing at the baptismal font with you, I covenant with you that I will mourn with you when you mourn. I covenant with you that I will comfort you when you stand in need of comfort. Those are powerful covenants. And what is more extraordinary for me is that they are ratified by the presence of each member of the Godhead. So you have the God who carries our burdens all the way through his life, and this is so beautifully articulated in Alma 7, all the way through his life into Gethsemane and onto Golgotha is God the Christ. The God who mourns with us when we mourn is the God of Enoch and the God of Jacob 5, God the Father. And then the God who comforts us when we stand in need of comfort is God the Holy Spirit. It is extraordinary. And I feel if we understood the power and the efficacy of these commandments, that would give us all room for those of us struggling with our faith in any shape or form, or that this is something they can still do. This is something they can still do, that they can reach out and help friends. As King Benjamin said, if you are in the service, if you are ministering to your fellow man, that is how you worship God. And so for those of us who are hanging in there where this is really, really difficult, can we make it to one more church meeting where I am very likely going to be horribly offended or wounded by something that is spoken? Can I make it there at least just to participate in the sacrament? And then in our minds renew those covenants, and then go out with just a greater desire to minister. That in and of itself can strengthen us and help us through that long, painful dark that Flannery O'Connor is talking about.
Yeah.
And whether it's in our own, but generally it will be in the fellowship of other people who are also engaged in that work.
I love thinking of that, the fellowship of doubt. And that in that fellowship, if we understand the Godhead and the three different roles, and that we should try and be like each of those entities
and
as
that,
we minister,
exactly.
and know them.
And know that each of those entities is sanctifying your ministry. Whenever you comfort, that is sanctified by the Holy Spirit. Whenever you mourn, and it may just be sitting with a friend and not saying anything at all, but being prompted by the Holy Spirit. It's just so beautiful when we allow the Godhead to work in our lives in these capacities. They strengthen us in ways that that surprise us. And so finally we think, okay, All right, so this really bothers me in church history, or this really bothers me, what the prophet just said, or whatever it is. But because of this experience, I can hold it. And so you start learning to be able to hold this, and this will strengthen and increase. And this is what is the most important thing, is living a life of sanctification and holiness with the Godhead, being asked to collaborate with the Godhead in this incredible mission. And then this will resolve and take care of itself, or maybe it won't, but at least we'll be able to live with it. So the pain of my family, that will never be resolved. I will always have that pain. But the covenants that I have made, the insights that I have received about the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, that have enabled me, given me the texts, given me the place in my mind and heart to write these books with my husband, that's extraordinary. It's like, I challenge anybody, find me a God that is more deserving of worship than this God. Find me a Christ who would choose to suffer in this most unspeakable way and live on this earth, that he might have empathy with us, that he might understand, and at the end of the day, not only that, but heal us. That's extraordinary, that we can be healed from our injuries. And I think with a Christ who heals, it was a deliberate movement from sin to woundedness, because we felt there is validation in our restoration scriptures.
Yes.
To move from sin to woundedness. So, and it's particularly apparent in 1 Nephi 13:32 in the 1830 version. And it's all about the injury to us because of the loss and plain and precious things from the biblical text. And Heavenly Mother, of course, is one of them. But to understand that we are wounded, and then to understand that sozo can be translated as saved or healed. Because, as you know, Greek is such a beautiful, expansive language. But of course, the Protestants in the court of King James I of England, who was terrified of meeting the same fate his mother was, and who was very Catholic, but he was in Protestant England now, so it was like, I'm not interfering with this. And so they would use a much more malevolent, that's a harsh term, but they would use a translation that would emphasize sin and salvation for a few rather than healing for everyone.
Yeah. And how beautiful to think that the restoration of the gospel is what can restore us.
Yes.
That's what not only saves us, but heals us. And
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing your journey, and that to be healed doesn't mean that everything has been taken care of, but that it's a process. And
Right.
thank you for personifying that for us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm very grateful. Thank you so much for inviting me. This has been an honor for me. Thank you.